Okay. All right. Here we are. We're live. This is the first live stream that we're doing after Trump got defeated.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Let's start.
I don't know. Well, I mean, if you count both the legal and the illegal ballots, then yes. But right now, I think their biggest stance is their biggest moral stance right now is that we want to make sure we only count the legally cast ballots. That's their thing. That's like, when Trump said, yeah, I really hate pedophilia. It's a brave stance, just like that. We're only going to count the legal ballots. This is great.
Well, that doesn't mean he's opposed to QAnon. He's just, opposed to pedophilia.
It's
the same thing here, though. He'll continue to be a martyr. He'll continue to deny the results, and he'll never concede. Yeah,
well, you know what? It's I heard they also hate cancer. They're not fans of cancer either. So, there's a lot of really controversial. They're really putting themselves out there. But anyway, welcome everyone to another episode of Professional Novice with Ali Rizvi. My name is Ali Rizvi, and I'm here with the pre-election crew again. We've got strategist extraordinaire Mookie Spitz here, who is happy that he's both right and wrong, and he'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we've got filmmaker and director Jay Shapiro, and we're going to touch on a lot of things today. So there's just a lot to talk about. There's this whole idea of, yes, Biden got more votes than anybody in history, but then so did Trump, right? 70 million people. So, we have to talk about that. We're going to talk about people are saying, well, Trump is gone, but is Trumpism dead? Is Trumpism still here? We're going to talk about that, and I may have an unpopular opinion on that. We got a COVID vaccine. Pfizer announced that the results for the first COVID vaccine that came out just a week after the election, which is going to thrill Trump, right? Is it's out and it's
he was right after the election. We're not going to talk about COVID anymore.
Not going to talk about COVID anymore. But yeah, so 90% efficacy rate, which is actually phenomenal. And that's really good news, something that we should all celebrate. And we're going to talk about the polling. So I didn't know this, but Jay Shapiro is a massive data geek. He had these complex spreadsheets, and he told me, I think, a day or two before Pennsylvania was called what the vote margin was going to be, because he projected it county by county, and he you also did an analysis.
I'm gonna nail it. It's like I watch it, I refresh it. I'm gonna be like within like 500 votes. I'm like very impressed with myself on it. Yeah,
I'm very impressed.
My map was wrong, but I did call Georgia.
But so I gotta say, one thing. Another thing Jay did was he went through Nate Silver's projections, and we talked about that a little bit, and we're gonna get into that too, whether they were accurate or not. So right now, where it stands is that Trump is at 290 electoral votes, but if you look at Fox News, which has
Biden is it?
Biden. Oh Jesus, God. Yeah. Okay, Biden is. I misspoke.
You almost gave it back to us.
I know. Well, apparently you can just claim now. I can claim a state for yourself. Yeah. But so 306, including Arizona, which is probably going to be called. Georgia, maybe more, but at 306, this is the exact number of votes that Trump won by. He had 306 against Hillary Clinton, and he called it an electoral landslide. He tweeted that he won an electoral landslide, even though he got 3 million fewer votes. Biden's got about 5 million more. And interestingly, his margins in Wisconsin are the same that Hillary lost by. The margins of loss in Pennsylvania currently are the same as Hillary lost by as well. And I think that the margin in Michigan is much higher. And Georgia still has to be called, probably go to Biden as well. So, Jay, let's start with you. What's your reaction to this? You were very skeptical about the polling. You wanted to completely...
Well, no, I mean, I wasn't. It was interesting to go back to think about. So yeah, like in our pre-election, I was like, Mookie, the onus is on you to tell us why the polls are wrong. Yeah. So to back it up, I am a data geek and nerd. I've learned everything what I like through fantasy baseball nerding out, frankly, and I've gotten really good at spreadsheets. And I find a lot of comfort in them for a lot of reasons that we could talk about. But one of the amazing things about data is it can be sort of, this cold and nerdy and boring kind of thing, but you can actually find incredible insights in it. And so here's the thing with the data. I was asking you, Mookie, like, you have to explain to us or give us some kind of hypothesis as to what could be causing a universal massive polling error that would have led to Trump winning. Now, I mean, that's why I've tracked it so much, because everyone's hearing how off the polls were. And I do think they were off, Ollie. I was sort of like, I think I see you in the spreadsheet now too. I've been tracking sort of how badly they were off. There's a lot of ways to carve it, but there genuinely does seem to be a rather universal underestimation of Trump in 44 of the 50 states. By Nate's estimation, were underestimated, not by a ton. The average that I'm adjusting with a mail-in adjust, because we forget that a lot of states are recounting and the Biden bump is happening everywhere, not just in Georgia and Arizona, or not Arizona, Georgia and Pennsylvania, places like that. So I think that, the average miss, I'm guessing, is going to be about 3% or a little less. It's not a great polling year, but it's not terrible. But it was pretty much universally underestimating Trump. So what could those things be?
So by the way, just quick interruptions. 3% falls within the sort of the normal polling error that you have most years.
Yeah, right? It was normal-ish. And frankly, if you were just betting on like yes or no to what state, like calling the state, and using the final projections from 538, then you would have had 47 of the 50 states correct. You only got 3 wrong, which were Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida, of course, which I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about.
He didn't call Ohio for Trump? I thought he did. I mean, I think he did call Ohio.
It was very, very close on the very last projection was in favor of Biden, 49.8 to 49.2, basically a toss up, but a little bit. If you would just bet who's
here, he
win
said for Ohio, he did call it a toss up, but he said it was 55 to 45 for Trump. So in a way, like if you could just go by
the percentage is why. See, and so this is what I want to talk about, because everyone was staring at the 90 out of 100. So this is, to your point, Mookie, it was like the confidence thing of just who's going to win the election. So here's where he really got it wrong, and this is going to lead to a non-nerdy point that I really want to talk about, and I know you do too, Mookie, about like how we talk about the election and what it means and how we talk together. Because again, you come out of the mountain of this data, I think, with an important point, because So what could explain something like this underestimation? If what you need to build into your model, again, let's remind people that Nate Silver is not a pollster, right? He's just collecting polls and aggregating them and trying to figure out which polls are good and which polls are bad, and then weighting them and coming up with some magic 8-ball. These are the chances that, Joe Biden's going to win or Donald Trump's going to win. And he was coming up with this number of 90% certainty of Joe Biden here, and which I think really was about 25 points too high. And this is really why, is that, yes, if his numbers were right, and Ollie, like you're saying, if there's a general margin of error of 3 points in either direction, right? Like you guess 45 and it could be 48 or it could be 42, but it could go either direction. Then the math works out of like, okay, Trump has to get really lucky that the error hits in his way 10 times in a row and then he wins. And so I'm going to call it 10%. But if the error is not a general margin of error that could go either way, but a specific one that goes in one direction, in this case, meaning a bias against Trump, or you could say a bias against Biden, then you would build in a level of uncertainty into your model that there is something that you may not be seeing and that none of the pollsters are seeing that is causing a massive, or let's say, again, a global but specific underestimation of one particular candidate, and it would just bracket the certainty of your stupid 90% little like Fox, who was predicting, like their little cartoon guy was predicting 90 out of 100 simulations Biden wins. It shouldn't have been that high because, and again, here's the cool point, I think the leading candidate is, we still don't know exactly why the pollsters all missed this on average about 3 points in the direction of Biden. So underestimating Trump in 44 of the 50 states in the polls. One possible explanation, and I think it's an interesting and a good one and the leading one for me at the moment, is that we know pollsters gather most of this data through phone calls, landlines and cell phones, et cetera. And because it was a weird year with the pandemic, especially, there's a hypothesis that would be interesting, that more Biden-leaning voters tend to be higher educated. We know that, and information type jobs, and a lot of them, frankly, were working from home and working remote, and a lot of them actually got laid off. Where there's a Trump lean with certain jobs that are more blue collar mechanics, people who are still going to work, or service level jobs.
Yeah,
essential workers on a certain level, and they just literally weren't around to pick up the phone as much. Again, it's a small percent, but you only need a small global percent that none of the pollsters were accounting for to cause an error like this. And if that kind of thing is true, it's actually sort of an interesting blind spot of, let's call it like the coastal elite, to not even get the polling right because they weren't noticing that Trump voters are probably being a little underrepresented because of this kind of hypothesis. Now, again, it's just one hypothesis, but if it turns out to have some data behind it or some oomph behind it, it would be an interesting one. And again, point to, almost the cry of the forgotten man Trump voter. Well, perhaps the pollsters literally did forget to account for you here in the middle of a pandemic. And so there is a little bit of head scratching and nerding out of like, how did this happen? But also an interesting potential social point of like, that's actually kind of shitty that it happened that way. Anyway, I don't know what it is. I like the numbers. They give me a lot of security. It's overblown that the polls were bad this year, but it's also undeniable that there's a miss, and they were missing Trump voters. And this is,
thing. They're also the shy Trump voters. So that's another hypothesis that everybody's floated around, that, the way defiant, shy or defiant Trump voters. But there's that. Now, I want to ask you one thing. That did you kind of look at some of these, because these are polling aggregates, right? So everybody selects which polls they want to include in their aggregate. Real Clear Politics includes some of the sort of the conservative partisan polls too, which were off in their own way. They were actually even more off in a lot of ways. But I saw the Ann Seltzer poll, and Ann Seltzer, like, everybody saw that and freaked out. All the pollsters saw it and freaked out because she has this reputation of being an amazing pollster, but she only worked on Iowa. So the Des Moines Register poll that came out, I think 2 days before the election, had Trump leading Iowa by like 7 points, and I think he won Iowa by exactly 7 or 8 points. So I'm wondering if one of the things to do is to actually call the list of pollsters that you include in your aggregate, and maybe look at the methodology of what's Ann Seltzer doing that other people weren't doing.
Yeah.
Have you looked at that at all? Or
not really. I mean, Nate claims he does that. He gives them A+ grades and B- grades or whatever. And,
he's good. I mean, he's pretty good, but let's hope he gets something from it. But.
Yeah. And let me back it up, because I know now we're deep into like the nerdy numbers and stuff. But if this were a normal election, that the mail-in votes had not been so big because of COVID or whatever, the narratives would be so reversed on to go back to our final prediction. Ali, you and I both said we would have a very comfortable election night. Yeah. And I don't know how we were so dumb to think like we just forgot of like, because frankly, if they came in on if this was a normal election night, we would have gone to sleep being like, oh wow, like this is a fairly comfortable lead. Yes, Trump did better than we expected, but Biden's taking 5 states back that Hillary lost. He's giving back 0, and he's going to win with 300+ electoral votes. Like, okay,
and
like
a wide popular vote margin,
and in a modern day politics, a fairly wide popular vote margin. So,
growing,
but with razor thin margins, razor thin, where none of the swing states are above 3%. From what the failing New York Times.
They're battlegrounds because of that. Like
I get it. But going back to the 90-10 confidence level that was there. Okay, to your point, the narrative going into this, the red mirage, everyone's expectations, and we're not even talking about the congressional races, which were also skewed. Right, the Democrats spent tens of millions of dollars for particular races, fairly confident that they would flip based upon polling data. So if we look, you're just talking about, this 3% margin of error, perception versus reality. The polls weren't that bad. I guess so. But when you really look at the brass tacks of the overall expectations of the country, everyone's reaction to these polls, which were skewed, which underestimated the strength that the Trump support really exuded that evening, right? And continues to exude. 71 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. Okay, so once again, razor thin margins, polls that were erroneous not only for the presidential race, but also the congressional one. The allocation of resources, especially on the Democratic side, which could likely have been better served had the polling been more accurate. All this points into the direction of what we were talking about last time, is that there's a little bit too much attention given to the numerics and the metrics.
Way too much.
And I think it's great that you guys are diving in, you know, geek out and go for it. But to be honest with you, I hate the conversation because we're stewing in this notion that the polls weren't as wrong as everyone thinks. And where are we headed for this? I mean, from a predictive model, yes, Biden did win, and the expectation was high that Biden won. But emotionally and in terms of the zeitgeist of the country, Trump did way better than expected. And going back to the earlier part of our last conversation, what does that mean for the country? And now that Biden and Harris did win, okay, the reality of them ascending to power within this framework of an even more polarized electorate, with an unprecedented amount of people voting for Trump. Clearly, Biden won the popular vote. Clearly, Biden won the election, but by tiny margins that are still being contested. So to me, this is much more meaningful a conversation than necessarily rehashing the metrics. They need to get better. There could have been a million different factors. I like this idea, too, that the Trump voters who are more essential workers were neglected. That's a very, very interesting theory. I think that's fascinating and worth delving into. I also want to reiterate the defiance of the Trump voter. We had the Florida results, which indicate a huge indexing for the Latino community. The Castro-hating, Maduro-hating Latinos were like, screw socialism, man. Okay, they fell under the radar. Really there's a lot of evidence that high school kids were registered in record numbers to be Trump thumpers. Okay, and they fell under the radar too, pretty much as we discussed last time. The newly registered GOP voters, the defiant voters, and this COVID analysis is fascinating too. But it all begs the question of the situation that we're in, which is Biden didn't win by as much as we thought he would. Trump was way more popular than we thought he would be. And where does that leave us now in terms of an utterly divided country as we roll into a new administration? I think that's an important conversation to be had based on everything that's led into it.
What you're saying about like Trump doing way better, actually, Trump drove his like those rallies and everything that he did towards the end. I don't know how many people they'll kill in the future, but the thing is they work to drive turnout. And one of the reasons that you see like, a lot of he's not accepting the results of the election. He's saying that,
and he won't. He never will.
Which is insane. But the problem is there are a lot of people like Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Gingrich, a lot of these really heavy hitter Republicans who are aligning with him. Rudy Giuliani, like these guys are aligning with him, and a lot of them are doing it. I mean, you know why they're doing it is because it was because of him that the turnout was so great. 71 million people.
They know where the power lies. Yeah,
they rode that to their Senate victories, and they rode that to their congressional victories.
That's my point, guys. Right? I mean, it's like I'm agreeing with you. You know, you guys had it called. And I was the underdog, and you guys won in terms of that. Biden won, and I'm as happy as you are. Right on.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to get at the undercurrent, the significance, and the fact that the polls weren't as we thought they were. Right, to Trump's favor is exactly what you're talking about, Ali. Which is what's the future of the Republican Party, and what's the future of the Biden-Harris administration? Right, because the Democrats did not take the Senate. I thought they would because I had all my Trump friends pretty much throwing in the towel. They were like, Spitz, you got that. But that didn't even happen.
You were getting a lot of crap for being very cynical. But the thing is that I actually, I think where we ended up is really somewhere between what both of you guys were talking about. Like the polling, yes, the polling was off, but it really wasn't the disaster that we thought it would be. I mean, it's not like it's a death of polling forever. It's still going to be used as a metric, and there's room for improvement, and there's insights into it where you can actually improve it. But at the same time, what you were talking about, the strategy, the branding aspect, and this, what you're saying about the emotional, the gut intuition thing, that was pretty dead on too. Like if you look at whatever way you look at it, whether you look at the congressional races, whether you look at the amount, the number of people who actually came out to vote, the enthusiasm, it was a lot more than I think people estimated.
With 235,000 dead people, with an impeachment.
It's insane.
The list goes on and on.
30% economic contraction.
Right, with 30. Right. But the point I was making, though, is that there's a mirroring effect. You say 235,000 dead, and I say Trump supporters who hate lockdowns because their businesses have been shut down.
COVID fatigue.
The COVID fatigue. There's a mirroring effect, point for point. So every time a liberal is outraged at Trump, a Trump supporter is fueled by that very energy. It's not something to ignore about the Trump brand. It's something to enthusiastically embrace. And that's the national deadlock. That's why you've got all the supporters calling, fake news to the results. How can you have a democracy without open and fair elections? When you contest the bedrock of democracy, then where do we stand? And I think that this is going to continue. There's no benefit to Trump to concede. There's no benefit to give an inch on any of this. He's out. Great. Whether he walks out or whether he's escorted out, the trajectory of the rest of his career post-presidency is all about claiming martyrdom. The election was stolen from him. And his supporters, to the point you were making about Lindsey and the rest of the sycophants in the GOP, know the power that Trump still retains. And it's formidable. So what are we going to do about this as a nation? How do we deal with it? How can Biden and Harris, do what they want to do? The Congress is split. The Democrats lost seats in the House.
It was pretty wild.
What the fuck? How did that happen?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the runoffs in Georgia go. Stephanie Rudat saying, I cannot believe none of you have a Zoom background of 4 seasons total landscaping.
I had a friend send me that about like 10 minutes ago. I just didn't have time to put it in there. But yeah,
I have had laughing fits every time. I might have one now, but
I cannot.
It's so good. It's classic.
It's so funny.
So they tried to book, for those who don't know,
who doesn't know
last great event. He booked the 4 Seasons hotel as he thought. And the 4 Seasons tweeted out that we don't have any event planned. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then it turned out they had accidentally booked the 4 Seasons total landscaping, which is between a dildo store and a crematorium.
Perfect.
It's a parking lot.
Perfect.
There's a garage door with Trump signs on it. There was a fire extinguisher on one side and a yellow fire hose on the other. And Rudy Giuliani was standing in the middle of it, and that's when they called the election while that conference was going on. I mean, it is
poetic justice. But Trump is all about the expiation of shame. Right. So what better way to lose than, next to a porn shop and a landscaping store?
I don't know. I think that might be too much spin. That might be trying too hard now. But so Shapiro, Jay, what do you think of what Spitz is saying about
obviously we're in, like, listen, we could do another one of these every week and it's going to be a little awful. I think like when you ask what do we do about it, is that we sort of referring to Democrats, non-Trumpers, America? It's like the we is tricky because I'm getting I don't know what we do about it sitting here. I'm at a loss. These Republicans in Congress, like these people went to civic classes, and they were the kids in high school who ran for office, and they love America and they love the institutions. I don't doubt that they love the founding of this country, and to see them be silent during this is actually I'm tired of trying to tell them what to do. They know what to do. It's really the ball's in their court.
Yeah, but we liberals are in power now.
Do? How do we right now how do we right now, I'm just talking the next 2 months, tell Lindsey Graham and that crew, us. It's not up to us to tell them to be like, hey guys, actually, you not standing up to this is embarrassing, and you ought to be thrown out of office and not be able to raise your head again. I've been saying this. If their line, Ali, you started making the joke. If their line is, okay, Trump should count the votes, or should see this through, and he has every right to challenge it. Yeah, he does. Let's do it. Let's go to fucking court. Let's do it. Don't let him play this fucking game. We have a system in place for this. If you call foul in this country at an election, great. You're allowed to call foul. We have courts to do this. Bring it to the court.
They are bringing it.
Let's see it. Where's the suit?
They are. Let them bring it to the court.
Let them bring it.
Mitch McConnell today said that
you think they're going to let them?
He support. Yeah, I mean, do what you need to do. Okay.
Do you think they actually will? Do you think Trump will actually bring it to court, knowing 100% he's going to lose?
Absolutely.
Right,
He's going to go through every legal machination that they can, and they're just going to extend it. It doesn't matter because it's the deep state, and it's not important what they do.
Ones he appointed.
It's irrelevant what they do. It's irrelevant what Trump does.
He doesn't think he's going to lose, though. That's the question, Jay.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, guys.
I think he knows he's going to lose. I know it doesn't matter, Mookie, but this is.
But my point though is us. So the Trump's going to be Trump, and then Lindsey Graham's going to be Lindsey Graham. Okay, this is not a news flash. We've been seeing this for 4 years. Sycophantic GOP, Trump being Trump. On brand, and he got 71 million votes. He's not going away. He's got the martyr story.
I'm with you. Right. Like the real damage is actually coming now. Like if he really does this and brings it to the courts and loses, because he's going to lose every single one. Every single one. And he cries deep state, including the judges that he appointed, and he cries deep state. If he delegitimizes the notion of courts and the Supreme Court, or like the final line of the final say, the final referee who gets to make the call for 70 million Americans, that is the worst damage. He is going out and lighting the country on fire on the way out, and that's something that Democrats have nothing to do with. So you're saying, how do we as like liberals clean up the mess of a man burning down literally the myth of a nation in people's mind? That when you lose the courts, you lost the country. Period.
I got it. But yeah. January 20th, Biden and Harris take command.
Okay.
With their own cabinet, and then we lead the by we, I'm talking Democrats.
Okay.
I'm talking us. Yes. I wanna take the burden of this polarization onto our shoulders, because we have control over our actions. Biden himself had a great speech of reconciliation. He came out and said that there's 71 million Trump voters, and I'm going to fight as hard for you guys as for my side. Right? He talked about the Eagles, and he talked he had a hymn, and he was poetic. Good stuff. Really good stuff. So he even
pulled in like Beacon on a Hill. He pulled in some Reagan language. It was very clear what he was doing.
There's talk of him bringing Republicans into his cabinet, right? And he's being inclusive, mindful of this reality that the Trumpers aren't going away, that a huge swath of America supported Trump and the Republicans, that it exceeded expectations, and they're going to have the Senate majority.
And to your point, and Trumpism has his Congress that he has to work with by the balls. He's got like Trumpism to your point,
and he's going to be on the sideline. He's going to be on the sideline throwing Molotov cocktails. This guy is not going to shut up until he drops dead. Okay, he's just going to be throwing shit in there.
If you're a Republican trying to win a race in the next 5 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, who is the number one endorsement that you're going to want to get? It's Donald Trump, which is fucking crazy. I know. What other Republican will matter to be in your endorsement? But to your point, if you want my strategic answer, what I think the obvious answer is, hopefully, and first of all, I'll say I think Joe Biden's the right guy for this job. I I if anyone can do it,
he's the best candidate out of.
I think he's the best candidate.
Him and Mitch McConnell are like buddies. They go back 40
Joe Biden
years.
has buddies, he's
this creature of the Senate.
I know, his buddies in the Senate on some level must be wishing they could call him to congratulate him. And I know there must be some wink.
Of course,
yeah. But
you seen that video of Lindsey Graham choking up and talking about how great Joe Biden is, right?
You've seen that. They know Joe Biden.
Yeah, the Lincoln Project ran that as an ad.
Yeah. if they want, I mean, if you want where I think the Joe Biden administration starts, obviously COVID's the easy one of like, let's get this under control, but it's delicate, like you're saying, Mookie. If on day one they say like mandatory lockdowns and masks for everyone, we'll see. I actually don't. It's going to be delicate.
Be careful, Uncle Joe. Be careful, Uncle Joe, because you don't go full libtard on this shit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, but it's a good point because they actually, you know, in some of your talks and me going through like the numbers and stuff, I think there's another really strong myth that I want to push back on somehow, although it feels silly now. I don't think we're actually all that divided or that divided of a country or that partisan. I think it's a real mirage and a deep one, and in large part because of polling, which I could get to. But I actually don't think the divide is that strong on here. What was it? 7 states had legalizing marijuana on the ballot, and it passed in all 7, including Louisiana, Montana, New Jersey, like on fundamental issues. And in California,
Florida approved the minimum wage.
Florida approved
increasing the minimum wage. Yeah.
California and I wanted to, this is a really important point. California, was it Prop 16 or something? The one that was an affirmative action one. You know this one, right? On their ballot, it was written basically a measure about allowing the government to hire based on race and diversity, this, that, or whatever. It doesn't say the word affirmative action, which is important. And it was defeated in California like 64% because of the way they wrote it. So I'm sure you know all of these statistics of like the branding problem when you present something to someone. If you go up to a Trump voter and say, hey, do you support Obamacare? You know, they say like, hell fucking no. It's like 85% no is what you get when you call it that. But if you go up and say, hey, you know, don't ever say the word, and you say like, how do you feel about offering a public option to compete with private insurance to allow you or others to blah, 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 blah. And then you get like 85% approval. Like people actually are reacting to, you know, this Mookie, to brand and to image and to tribe and to team.
Don't defund the police. It's not, revitalize the police.
Yeah. So we actually, if we could actually talk to each other, we actually fundamentally in this country agree on so much. We've been torn apart on all these little issues, and then these teams, like we're torn apart between who, you know, listens to country music and goes to NASCAR versus like classical music and wine, more than actual issues. It's crazy surface level stuff that's become weaponized. But to your point, and I'm going to answer it, of where the Biden team starts, because I think it's abundantly clear and I hope they don't screw it up. It's with prison reform and ending the drug war, because that 100%. Stuff absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and even like there wasn't a lot of great moments of policy conversation in the debates, but when it slipped out a little bit, Joe Biden basically announced the end of the drug war. And I was like, did anyone else see that? When he said we shouldn't be criminalizing people for drugs, we should be helping them, etc. The First Step Act was passed in the Trump administration. I don't know if people are watching who know about it. I think it was the only piece of semi-major legislation that passed in bipartisan. Right. And it basically started to chip away. The GOP built back in some of the things, but chip away at minimum sentencing for drug crimes. It was more lenient on getting out, basically chipping away at the kind of policies that Joe Biden signed in the 90s that he's getting crap for about the drug stuff. Yeah. So Joe Biden is, again, the perfect person to do this, because he can come in with humility. To those Trump voters you're talking about, Mookie, he can come in with humility, being like, yes, I'm not perfect and I kind of screwed this up too, and I want to undo it. The First Step Act signed under the Trump administration was great. I want to work on the Second Step Act and take it even further and bring something like that to the table.
Right. This is exactly what I'm talking about. What do we do? What do we do?
That's what we can do. And it turns out from that, but we just have to get through the next couple of months before we can have that conversation. But hopefully we do. But and it turns out the election, and if you're going to stare at polling numbers and try to be popular, there's evidence for it in there with the legalized drug stuff, including Oregon, which basically decriminalized all drugs.
Everything.
This is the place. This is the place you start. This is the place you start, and Joe Biden can start there. Kamala, which, by the way, I was pronouncing her name wrong, and my mom pointed that out to me on the first one. So it's Kamala, not Kamala. And
I don't think people say Kamala. People say Kamala. I don't think that's a.
Oh, sorry. I'm sure someone's mad about it, but
everything that's going on, I think that is the least of controversies. But
let's hope it stays that way. Anyway, her history in California as the DA and all that kind of stuff is a little bit trickier for that. Again, was not my favorite pick for VP, but here we are. She's got pronouns in her bio online. She's got a little she's got some of the worry around her, but we'll see how
that's why she was picked. I mean, there was a legitimate cleft, right? I mean, there is that. There was a whole thing that, there was the identity politics issue. Like, she fits the whole thing for the people who want the identity politics.
African American turnout was off the charts, folks. That's what gave Biden this election, I think.
The African
African American vote. Yeah.
And the circus, actually, I heard Killer Mike, right? He was talking about it. And they were saying, with Biden, there's a lot of things they were pissed off about. They were disappointed with Obama. They're disappointed with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. They haven't shown up for 40 years. A lot of the same stuff that, Trump says about them. But then he's like, but having Kamala Harris on, he's like, that made a big difference. So there's but I gotta, I want to say, like, I want to talk about this whole Trumpism thing, because, we're kind of getting into that territory now. So this idea that Trumpism is dead, I agree with you that I think that people are going to want to, just because of the turnout that he generated, they're going to want to do it. But Trumpism is not like the Tea Partyism or conservatism or republicanism, right? It's a cult of personality. Trump is like a brand unto himself. There's no real distinct ideology to it. Like, he's not really conservative in the sense that he doesn't really care about conservative institutions like, freedom of expression. He wants to ban burning the flag. It's a hodgepodge of different things.
Control the debt.
Yeah, but that's the
Good
thing.
luck
like,
with that. Yeah,
he doesn't have any kind of. When you talk about Reaganism, you think of stuff like trickle down economics. The only thing you can think of with Trump is, like, the tariffs and the trade stuff that he has, which isn't really anything original in the first place, right? But the thing with Trump, the reason that I don't think Trumpism is, I don't think it's scalable. Right? It's not scalable like, say, Reaganism or Obamacare or things like that, because he's a cult of personality. He's the only one who can do Trump. Okay, so you're gonna have all the other candidates can come in. They can do republicanism. They can be Tea Party. They can can carry those platforms and sort of ideologies. But the thing, I don't think people voted for Trump, like 71 million people voted because of Trumpism. I don't think that's the reason the turnout was. I think it's because it's Donald Trump. It's like, and I'm sorry.
Well, that was the essence of my point, which is why he exceeded expectations. The brand,
so, and I'm kind of
the guy, the man, the legend.
But that's why I think this, actually, Mookie, because of the stuff that you were talking about, and I think of Hitler, and by the way, Godwin himself, Godwin's law.
Hitler comparison, we got to take a shot.
I know Hitler.
Every time you compare Trump to Hitler, you got to do a big shot.
So Godwin himself, the writer of Godwin's Law, he gave us permission after Charlottesville to compare the Nazis to this, and so so we're not talking about Hitler and the genocide.
Again,
Holocaust.
do a shot.
We are talking about we're talking about the rise and the way that he worked, right? So he was a cult of personality. Of course, there's neo-Nazis right now, right? But that whole millions and millions of Germans going after this one guy, he's still the center of it. It's that cult of personality. So I don't think that, just like that wasn't scalable to other people cannot take that kind of stuff and mobilize 70, 80 million people around it. Other people just can't do that with
Right. But to Jay's point, though, this Trump cult continues after the loss. Usually a president loses, like, even Nixon bowing out, he gets pardoned, then he becomes an elder statesman.
It will continue.
Right?
Yeah, I know.
It's going to continue as long as this guy keeps frothing at the mouth, which
as long as
until they put him in the ground, right? He's just going to keep going and going. And the essence of his career moving forward is highly likely that he's going into big-time media. He might take over OAN, he might Trump OAN network, he might be the Fox News fixture.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing. It does continue. You're right? That whole neo-Nazi thing, Richard Spencer, all that stuff continues as well. But millions and millions of people coming and voting for a guy like this kind of thing only happens, like, if 71 million people voting for someone who's like an objectively a bad person, right? That kind of thing does not happen
I want to try
typically it doesn't happen at the party level. That part of it I don't think is going to survive. I think what's going to survive is his cult of personality, and that is going to.
But what does it represent, Ali? What were the emotional triggers that Trump engendered? This is, the heart of it. It's not policy, it's the dude. But the dude was successful because he triggered this upwelling of raw emotion. Everything from moral licensing to the expiation of shame, like Sam Harris, confessed in his own.
Embrace your inner asshole.
Embrace your inner asshole. That sensibility ain't going away either. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, which is
I think we're missing something here.
Right.
I think we're missing something here. Ali, it's not a fully formed thought, so see how it fits. But I think to defend the Trump voter as probably upset at that sort of characterization. I know a lot of Trump voters were upset at Sam saying that. I think Sam was dead on psychologically. I think maybe it's a post hoc rationalization. Imagine if you are an isolationist, a real isolationist. You just think globalism is a disaster for all kinds of reasons, right? What candidate actually since post-World War II would have been your guy until Trump came along?
Donald.
And actually, I'm challenged, as you were going through that, Ali, and Hitler.
Or Bernie. I don't know.
Yeah, but not quite. Like, I feel like this word neoliberal, and I've been trying to, actually, my fiance and I have been trying, like, all week being like, what the hell does that word even mean? It's become this, like, slippery insult that liberals use to, like, yell at other liberals. I think it's just sort of like globalist or globalism and neoconservative. We could talk about those things, but if you generally think the march of globalist, I'm seeing the word a lot still being thrown around and like insulting people who are trying to like damage Trump. If you are genuinely a nationalist, or as Steve Bannon wanted to call him, like a popularist or something, your menu to choose from of people really who could break through, it needed a personality like Trump. Perhaps it needed a personality like Hitler. I can't actually think of a nationalist in the entire. Yeah, we're getting there. I'll throw another one in because I can't think of another nationalist in the entire history of the last 100 years on Earth who didn't have that kind of personality. I think of one. Give me one. I'm thinking of like Idi Amin. All of them.
They all do. That was my authoritarian rage.
They're demagogues. It goes together.
It gets people excited.
It gets people excited, but it also seems like I don't know what a rational, and this is to their credit, I think we do deserve a genuine conversation about globalism. Clearly, the middleman in America feels forgotten, feels like they got a raw deal from globalization. In a lot of ways they did. And we've been telling them like, oh, it's cool. Like better industries will come along any day now. Like just hang in there or something. And to a degree they do. But globalism has it's not utopia, and we need better ways to talk about it. And frankly, if the only option on the menu for the last 100 years has been Hitler and all like yes, Idi Amin, I'm just gonna, if you really had alcohol, I'd be just getting you hammered by now. But like Donald Trump,
Hitler is he's the most recognizable one. That's what the problem is.
That's why we always go there.
At the same time,
I just want to get away from Trump equals Hitler.
No, we're not.
We can stop.
We're not.
Mookie, I was trying to do that and grant that of like, it's like sympathy for the nationalists of like, if you really want to have this honest conversation, I just don't know where it is. And I sympathize that it's been sort of like, you haven't been allowed into the room with your complaints about globalization without following a total asshole.
Immigration, globalization,
automation,
trade,
all of it. Yes.
American interventionalism, where lots of people die
wasting money.
and we get nothing back except bodies and spending trillions of dollars.
Yeah,
there's a long list of America First that reiterates what you're getting at, Jay, which is it kind of goes against what you're saying, Ali, that Trump did have some policy associated with him. I know a lot of Trump people, they admit that Trump's a maniac, but they love what the guy has done in terms of immigration, in terms of anti-globalist kind of stuff. Give it to NATO, fuck the French, that's like
the Paris Accord.
The Paris Accord, screw global warming. It's either bullshit or it's a 500 years away. So let's not dismiss Trump as just an aberration.
Yes.
And let's not dismiss what he's done, even in terms of policy. There's a gelling of personality with policy, and that erupted in 71 million votes.
No, that's fine. That's not what I'm saying. So the thing is, yes, you're right. Like nationalism and demagoguery, and that isolationism, protectionism, all of that goes together, right? Because it's actually the ultimate form of identity politics, which is another huge fail for liberals who just allowed themselves to get tagged with the identity politics label, when the ultimate identity politics is all of this stuff on the right that you're talking about. Anyway, that I'm not saying that I think that there weren't policy things, that there weren't things that people related to, right, that they liked.
The judiciary.
Yeah. I'm just saying that all of those other people who do that, if John Kasich came in and he had the same policies, or if Mitt Romney came in, he had the exact same policies, they would lose. They would not get 71 million votes. Okay. Now, if Trump didn't have any of these policies, and he had the policy of let's get Muslims in concentration camps, I think he would still get a huge number, maybe not 71 million, but a way more votes than any of us think, because of who he is. Right?
But what's the
it's
point
not Trumpism.
What are we trying to get at? That after Trump leaves, if I can just summarize, you're saying if Trump's out of here, even if he's raging from the sidelines on his own network, he's going to lose his influence because he's not really in power. And let's say Nikki Haley runs in 2024, and he chills the hell out. She's charming. She's a person of color. She's female.
Same agenda.
And then, but it's the same thing. It's kind of America first through Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
So then what are we really talking about here?
What we're talking about is I don't think it flies. I think it's policy independent. I think
Nikki Haley can't win in 2024.
I'm not saying she can't win, but Nikki Haley is not going. If Nikki Haley does half the stuff that he does, she cannot go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and keep all her votes.
But she doesn't have to, though.
She does. That's not the point. The point is she can't. He could have had an entirely different policy agenda, right? He could have been, you're talking about, you don't like Hitler comparisons. I find that, so the thing is, when we're talking about demagogues, I think that it is a good comparison. I think whenever we're saying never forget, you have to be able to bring it up. Right. I don't think everything should be compared to it, but you have to be able to talk about it, because if you never talk about that comparison with anything, just because nothing is as bad, there are other aspects to it. There's the rise. There is the oratory craft, the use of the rally, the political rally, as a way to stop people from thinking and just get them into sloganeering, which really, really works very well when you're trying to do something like Germany first, America first, whatever. So those comparisons, I think, are apt. Not everything is about that. I mean, not to diminish, obviously, but not everything's about what happened after 1940, right? So when you're talking about his craft, his political craft, there is a cult of personality, and these kinds of things do die out, right? The ideologies don't die out, but their ability to galvanize a majority of a nation, 70, 80, 90 million people, the entire population of Germany, all those crowds, everything you saw at the Trump rallies.
Yeah, but
that kind of thing that's just not scalable if you take the exact same thing and you move it to a different candidate. That's what I'm trying to say.
I got you, but it's a counterfactual conditional. And then we could argue all night long as to what this new Trump could or would be like. And I would go further and say we could have a Trump on the left too, and we will have a Trump on the left, because both sides of the aisle have learned from this guy. A raging maniac populist can win elections. It gets people excited. And I'll extend the mirroring effect that you're labeling Trump this fascist at the core. And a lot of what he says in terms of that rhetoric is similar. But when you ask Republicans, Trump supporters, and people who aren't even that enthusiastic about Trump, they'll say the same thing about us, that we're full of hypocrisy and bombast, everything from affirmative action to cancel culture, right? That's a kind of fascism too. And I'm not downplaying one side over the other. But what I'm advocating for is a sense of balance and a sense of perspective. And we need that if we're going to reconcile as a country. We can't sit here and make Trump synonymous with Hitler, because all of a sudden the deplorables become Nazis, right? What I'm trying to suggest here is that we have our own implicit biases as liberals, and they're significant. And we squeaked by in this election, just barely, a few points of standard deviation one way or another, and I would have won this bet, guys. And then we'd be really in the shit.
Yeah,
so what I'm trying
Trump
to get at is that what can we do to better understand the 71 million people who voted for Trump? To Jay's great point, there's messaging issues that the Democrats need to overcome. There's a feeling of inclusiveness, and there's opportunities, exactly like Jay mentioned, for, let's say, prison reform, right, and drug reform, reevaluating our international standing. Do we really want to launch more wars? Look at all the wars that have happened post-World War II, except for maybe Korea. What have we gotten out of it? What about our international relations? How's that all played out for us? What does it mean to be a global leader? And what price have we paid for that?
So
Trump
I feel like
the foundation to its knees,
right.
And this Trumpian deconstruction of post-World War II America is meaningful, because he's revealed a lot of weaknesses that we've taken for granted. And I hate the guy. I think he was a menace, and it's going to take a generation to get over Trump. But there are benefits to this Molotov cocktail that got thrown into the Oval Office.
I feel like I'm going to be taking your position to a more extreme degree, the one that you had pre-election here. So that's what I'm trying to, I don't think, I think, what you guys are saying, it makes sense. Yes, to start with the drug wars, all those policy things are true. But to understand what drove 71 million people out to vote for him, I think you have to look at how demagoguery works and how mass manipulation of people works, and what the mass psychology of it is, what the techniques are that are used. And that's the only context in which I brought up that comparison. I won't say his name again. Voldemort.
Please don't.
I won't. I was going to say Voldemort, but I'm just bringing that up because I think that that is what we need to understand. What the stuff that Scott Adams used to talk about before Trump got elected, and he predicted it. That is the kind of thing that we need to talk, because honestly, he could have had the opposite policy, but if he delivered it the same way, right? If he delivered it the same way, it would have worked, because he has that appeal. The most significant thing he's ever said is, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot people and no one would care. 235,000 people dead, 30% like economic contraction, like the worst.
That was my whole point leading into it. Right.
And by the way, the thing I want to say is, like, the deplorables and the Nazis and everything, I'm not making that comparison. I was talking about Trump and comparing him to demagogues from the past, okay, who've been manipulated. And I'm talking about, like, religious prophets, cult leaders, political leaders, right?
Winston Churchill. He was charismatic.
Sure. Yeah, he was very charismatic.
Behind him. So
they were, but there is something about this kind of thing where where Trump can actually say absolutely horrendous things, like, ban all Muslims from the country, like, that all the crap that he has said stuff that I don't even think Winston Churchill could get away with. There are only a few people in history who've been able to get away with those things and move millions, tens of millions of people to align with them, right? And that, I think, is what makes that psychological process happen, independent of policies, is what we need to look at. And if we keep on saying, no, we're not going to go there because we don't want to violate Godwin's rule, we're not going to go there because we don't want to think of all of these deplorables as Nazis, right? What you're saying, I don't think that they are. I think they're victims. I think a lot of the Nazis were victims, honestly. I don't think that
says the same thing about the liberals. We're victimized by our own naivete.
Right. But Trump also says
12 years old.
But Trump says that CNN is fake news and New York Times is fake news, and they say that Trump is fake news, but they're obviously not equivalent. It's not. I'm not talking about the people. I think his supporters, like I actually said this earlier today, I think that a more apt term for them is not basket of deplorables, but basket of gullibles, right? They're gullible. That is also insulting, but it kind of absolves them.
I think you're exacerbating the problem that I'm trying to get.
No, I'm only talking among ourselves. I'm not going to go up to them and say they're gullible. I'm not going to do that. Like, but
I don't believe what you say that extensively, because I think the gullibility is almost equivalent on the liberal side.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, of course it is.
We take things for granted. We have our own filters and point of view. And if back to the earlier part of the conversation, if we're going to meaningfully move forward as a country, we got to get out of this mindset that the other guys are gullible, that they got sucker punched by this con man maniac. The same thing can't happen to us. If we had a liberal Trump in there doing all this crazy shit, only he'd be advocating for climate control and affirmative action, then maybe we would have put up with it too.
What if it's true?
I'm just saying that we got to get out of this mindset of us versus them. A populist could arise on the left with as much fluidity and enthusiasm as on the right.
I think we have to face up to the mindset. I think we have to understand it and really delve into it so that the same thing doesn't happen to us again. The whole point of things like #NeverForget is to not have that repeat itself. But if you read like if you read some of these historical biographies and watch some of these documentaries from the 70s, you'll see parallels that are uncanny in terms of craft, technique, oratory, that just formulaic things that these guys do. And what Trump has done is nothing new. There's nothing new in it.
We got a taste of the third world with Trump. We got a taste of Banana Republic here. Mm-hmm. It was a long time coming, but it's here. And that, I think, is a meaningful starting point for what we should do to mitigate that. Mitigate Trump for now, but mitigate this populist zaniness, which has leveled half the world already, right? We're vulnerable to it. This goes back to American exceptionalism, which is going to zero. We're not exceptional in any way, especially after this point. So now what?
Yeah. Jay, you've been quiet for a little bit.
I'm just watching. Watching you guys go.
This is a problem, but
I mean,
I don't know. What do you think?
I think if I'm hearing it correctly, Ali, you're talking about, I'm actually reading a book for a potential other project about the authoritarian dynamic, just sort of a predisposition that we have in psychology for authoritarian dynamic, which is not a right-wing phenomenon or a left-wing phenomenon that can surface everywhere. Yes, and we need to keep an eye on that. We tend to be more familiar with the left-wing ones or right-wing ones, but it's sort of universal. And what triggers that, and there are ways to study that and things that do that. I have, at the end there, Mookie bringing up like third world, we got a taste of the third world, because I've just traveled a lot, and the parallels I just can't help but making all the time to East Africa, especially, where I've seen a lot of political violence, and it just looks so similar all the time, coming from Trump and the
disputed elections, right? Like, I mean,
disputed. I mean, you wouldn't even be disputed there. And I mean, as far as like what would happen there, which hopefully doesn't happen here, is like to back this up to some of the context which led to Trump. I've said it, and it's still very true now, that I think Rupert Murdoch, we didn't talk about this yet, I think Rupert Murdoch is the most important person in the country right now. By far. And I don't know if you guys were surprised by the way Fox News handled it that night. Actually, last time, all three of us thought there would be violence on election night, or there was none, as far as I know. And I think in large part, that was because Fox News fairly, like, I don't know, their news desk and their opinion desks they're in a civil war right now, which is fascinating. They called Arizona first. Everyone knows this now, which led to a weird situation. Right.
They pulled away from the press conference today. Right.
Yeah, they pulled away. And like you could see Rupert Murdoch, I know like the New York Post that he owns also had this sort of like disparaging headline, and everyone's like, what's he going to do? Because it's very easy to go back and imagine the last week playing out in a nightmare situation where Fox News, let's say Fox News didn't just do what they did, but actually, and didn't just sort of like stay back, but let's say they called Arizona for Trump, and they called Georgia for Trump, and they called Pennsylvania for Trump, like that night. Like the first night, they just said like, hey, he's way up, we're done, we're calling it. And all the other networks didn't. And then we'd be in this situation now. Imagine the kind of, obviously there's a little unrest in Arizona, places like that. I think it would be quite violent mobs clashing. And imagine the nightmare scenario of something like in Arizona with a pro-Trump mob like getting violent and the governor being like, we got to get this under control. We're counting votes and it's about to go to Biden, but they're going to storm the, violence, being like, call in the National Guard. Would Donald Trump send in the National Guard to put down a mob that is supporting him? And I think the answer is no. That's the kind of thing you see in Uganda and places like that. And it didn't happen. Full credit, honestly, to someone like Rupert Murdoch for whatever was happening there at Fox News. That didn't happen and it still could, I suppose. But it seems like where people take Donald Trump was clearly the figurehead, like you're saying, Ali, of Trumpism, and it doesn't scale that way. All of the other dictators we said in the past, I won't say his name again either, it died down. The philosophy did not die, of course, but it always seems to find its way to the surface in these kind of personalities. But in some ways, I don't know if it's Donald Trump also doesn't exist if Fox News doesn't exist. Fox News has been our president for 4 years. I think we all know that. Donald Trump hasn't had an original thought in his head in his whole damn life. He got all of his ideas from what was on the news in the morning on Fox News. Rupert Murdoch was
Fox News overrided his general. It's like overrode his general's advice. Like
Lou Dobbs.
Fox News
called
Lou
Dobbs for
Sean
advice.
Hannity has been the guiding force of this thing we're calling Trumpism for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Yes. And frankly, and again, this isn't even to disparage Trump voters. I'm trying to give a lot of charity to this there. Like Fox News is also a angry reaction to a sort of, let's call it, overconfident, clicking our heels towards globalism kind of world. Fox News is this cauldron of, like a fuck you to all of that. Again, ugly, and it got uglier, but it probably serves a place in the world. Rupert Murdoch, we'll see what he does. He is still the most important person in this world. And I don't know how he's going to play this, because Mookie, to your point, if his viewers start leaving to something like AON or whatever it is in massive numbers, because Trump, I don't know how Trump feels about Fox right now. I think he feels like they sort of threw him under the bus a little bit. There was all like the tweeting of the Trump kids being like, GOP, where are you? We'll never forget, or whatever. It was very much this mafia threat of like, hey, are you guys going to help me? Like, the police are knocking down the door. Who's going to go shoot him for me? Fox really wasn't there until Hannity came on in the evening. In fact, like, I don't know how you feel about this. Yeah.
And Ingram, those evening shows. Yeah.
I don't know if it was coordinated or not, but it feels just too perfect that all of the networks called it within like 5 minutes. Like the moment Donald Trump,
all the time. It
happened like the moment that Donald Trump teed off on the golf course on a Saturday, about 9 hours away before Hannity gets on the air. However it happened, let's say it's random. It was fortuitous that it happened. I think that the news coverage and their ability to ramp this up, and now how they're going to handle and talk about Donald Trump, again, I think going after the heart, like literally the heart of a democracy. When you lose the courts, you lose the country. That's when civil wars happen, when people don't believe the courts anymore and just disregard their orders. That's when countries fall apart. That's why I'm dying for him. You think he's going to do it? I'm dying for him to bring every single challenge to court. And if Fox News...
He will. He will bring every single challenge to court, because if he loses, it doesn't matter, because it's the deep state. He's protracting this as long as the shenanigans.
If what we have is a conspiracy theory problem in America of the Trumpers and a QAnon problem, which is what we'll get to.
We do.
Okay, if that's the problem, rather than sort of a populist mob that Fox News is ramping up,
it's both.
It's a bad problem, but it's a better problem. If Fox News is like, okay, we're losing our QAnon people, but that's kind of okay, and we're going to rebuild sort of the Kasich, Marco Rubio, Ted, like even Tea Party-ish kind of ideological Republicans again. We'll see. The civil war on the Republican side is fascinating, what's happening right now on Fox. But yeah, anyway, to back up to your point,
it's not as open as the one on the liberal side either, because I think they try to. A lot of the senators, I mean, when you hear all these senators leave, the moment they leave, they're like, oh yeah, the entire Senate, all the Republicans can't stand the guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, his own cabinet members, he's had 4 or 5 generals leave. He's had pretty much everyone in his cabinets left. He's fired them on Twitter and shit like that. So they're just not, a lot of people don't like him. People who know him well tend to not like him. So there's
so it's irrelevant.
No,
you don't need to like the guy. He's got 71 million people who just
Yeah, that's a separate...
Sharpied his name.
That's
all that counts, man. That's it.
I agree. I agree with that part. I'm talking about the other thing that, what Jay's getting to is that if you have these sort of influential institutions that actually made him who he is, which is like Fox News and Rupert Murdoch and the congressional support that he got from McConnell, all these guys. If these guys start like slipping away from him, right, over time, and I think that they're going to do it, but they're going to do it very gradually. If that happens, then a lot of the machinery, right, that helped him be who he is may also it just become.
But after January 20th, he's no longer in power. He has no actual power, only power of perception and power of messaging and power of support.
So Spitz, I got to ask you something. That you guys are talking about the courts, and you're saying that he's going to take it to the courts. So I want to, because this is what I'm kind of getting from what Jay's saying, is that if he, if I'm Trump, right, and I have this tremendous amount of doubt, and I'm talking about every one of his supporters. I'm talking about there's people I know, friends of mine who are Trump supporters. They're like accountants, really rich people, educated, PhDs, everything, who support Trump because whatever reason, taxes, economic policies, whatever. 1 out of 3 Muslims, more than 1 out of 3, 35% of Muslims voted for Trump.
Okay? Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Latinos, right?
Yeah,
a lot of black people voted for Trump.
That's right. So
more than Kanye, I think. More black people voted for Trump than Kanye.
So, so what I'm saying is, like, a lot of these guys, they all believe this thing that it was stolen from him. They think it was rigged. Yeah. They completely think that. So he has these potentially, let's say it's 50 out of the 71 million people who believe this thing was rigged.
Yeah.
He takes it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court knocks it down and says, no, the election's legitimate. A lot of those 50 million are going to fall away. But if he doesn't,
bullshit. Wait. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. They're deep
he
state
benefits. He benefits. Look, listen. When ambiguity really, really helps when you want an idea to get through. When they killed Osama bin Laden, right, and the Obama administration killed him in Pakistan, everybody thought it was bullshit. They're like, no, he's still alive. Then the Taliban came in and they said, we're going to avenge his death. And some people said people were confused about it. And then there was conversation about, are we going to release the photo of his body? And Obama said, no, that's not who we are. It left the ambiguity out there, and that caused more.
I get it. Okay, maybe he won't go to the Supreme Court. It's just a matter of doing whatever he can to protract this until January 20th.
Of course.
Never concede, and he'll be a victim. That we all agree with, right? So whether he does go to SCOTUS or not, whether he goes through half or not, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter, right?
SCOTUS kicks it back to the states anyway.
It doesn't matter.
If anybody wants to know how it will happen, they're just going to be like, the states have the final say, guys, and the states are doing just fine. Like, honestly, the courts are holding, which is why I want him to bring it to every state. It'll be a long process, but he'll lose every single challenge.
He'll just extend this. It's not about winning any of this shit. That's irrelevant. Right. It's about protracting this all the way to January 20th. So when, like I said, if he's either walked out or if he's carried out, he'll be a martyr. The election was stolen from him. Biden and Harris are not legitimate, and he'll be on the sidelines screaming bloody murder until he drops. And that's a predictable model, and it's not too shocking. The question, like I'm saying, is we got that noise going on, but what can we do to help unify the country, seek reconciliation, and if we give advice to Joe and Kamala, did I pronounce it right?
You got it right. Yeah.
All right.
Check with my mom.
Joe and Kamala. All right, so
I've got an Indian heritage.
We're all in violent agreement here. We're arguing about minutia, but we're all in agreement pretty much what Trump's going to do. We're all more or less in agreement as to the polarization of the country and where we all stand in terms of the zeitgeist. So I think a worthy pursuit is for us to try to envision an America less divided and take the onus of that responsibility on our own shoulders, because we can't control the other side. And I would be so bold as to say that a lot of what's led into this polarization and a lot of the problems that we have in America as a country, systemic issues, have an awful lot to do with the left. They have to do with the way the left positioned itself. They had to do with the left strategy and a sense of alienation. You know, you were talking about that earlier, Jay, and you, Ali, too, that there's a sense of disenfranchisement. It's not just the cis white male. There are huge swaths of the country who are pissed off, and some of them are even terrified. You got the Latinos in Miami who are freaked out by Castro and Maduro, and they would take one autocrat over another. So how can we figure that out? We can't control them. We can control us. And what could we do better as liberals, neoliberals, progressive liberals, whatever the fuck liberals? What can we do better in terms of attaining our goals, which we think is a collective goal for overall good, with this juggernaut that's already been created of Trump thumpers and folks who think we suck?
Mars is saying, so you talked about the left, and so I think that we all agree on that. So he's saying the election results were somewhat encouraging in a repudiation of the far left, but I'm unconvinced. Was it really the case? As Trumpism isn't going anywhere, those two factors can set us up for failure 4 years from now. Yeah. So I want to ask, based on this, that what do you, if you could name, because I have my answer to this, if you can name the single biggest problem with the current liberals or left, what would that be?
Should I go first or Jay?
Go for it.
I go first. It's a sense of, and this is very emotional and high level, self-righteousness. As liberals, we think we're on the right side of history, that anyone who opposes all of our lofty ideals are deplorably inept to really understand what's in their best interests. And it's that haughtiness and that arrogance which triggers that huge swath of the country in a deeply emotional way, which in a sense has created the monster. So what is our solution to that? I need to learn this too. Listen before you talk, chill out a little bit, be more inclusive, and try to create an America moving forward where instead of dismissing as a reaction ideas and sensibilities that we personally might find abhorrent, to roll with it a little bit and seek more equitable compromise. And you'll push that back saying, well, the Republicans have been playing unfair, Merrick Garland, all this. But I just think, being a liberal for many, many years now, I go back to being a Reagan Republican when republicanism actually seemed to have some kind of meaning. I feel that this sense of haughtiness, this arrogance, this notion that liberals just tell people how it could and should be is emotionally triggering. And I think Joe did a great thing in his speech over the weekend. He conveyed humility, he conveyed empathy, and he conveyed an eagerness, not just a willingness, but an eagerness for inclusion, for cooperation, and for compromise. And I think that that's really essentially the best way forward, regardless of what's going on with the other half of the country. We owe it to ourselves and the country to chill the fuck out with our self-righteousness. Stop telling people what they should be. Stop guilting them down and start embracing the sensitivity of our neighbors. And become more American. I think we're arrogant fucks as liberals. Jay.
It's funny, the irony of like the Trump fuck your feelings crowd is actually we see your feelings and we should take care of you.
Exactly.
Like it's just, you're just projecting, you're actually angry. We'll be the therapist. I mean, it's a similar
that's actually condescending in itself. Is that
no, I know.
You guys are saying like you guys, you can tell them you guys say fuck your feelings. Well, no, we don't agree with you. We're not going to let you fuck your feelings. That's so elitist of us. Like we know better.
I mean, my answer is similar. It's like the worst aspect of the left for like the emotional one is just a hubris. So it's similar of how I'm going to answer it, because I mean, fundamentally conservative and progressive. We should, again, I always study philosophy and I get into those modes and I try to get under those things. what you find at the base of this, we should talk about the left-right words and the left-right paradigm, because it's changing in everyone's mind. And I think they're fairly useless words ever since sort of the world went global. I don't know what it really means anymore, but there is something such as a conservative and progressive sort of philosophy, which you could really pin down at its base to a willingness and openness to playing God, that humans ought to be in the driver's seat, and we are not subject to some sort of natural law. That's why atheists tend to be very progressive. I think in those exit polls, which I'm a little skeptical of generally, but we're like 85% atheists voted for Joe Biden. That's not a surprise when you study philosophy, that the mindset that is okay with kicking God out of the driver's seat and trying to grab the reins of morality and figure out what kind of world we want to live in, whether that's gay marriage or whether that's climate change or whether that's anything, just kind of regulation. You're regulating nature in a way. Whereas the conservative mindset, which is the ultra-libertarian mindset, is it's a natural law mindset is the philosophy word for it. You defer to natural law. It's what the free market kind of is. It's a natural law kind of system that you just hope the winners and losers, no one's really driving it. It has its own sort of energy behind it. And if there is a God, that's the one who's making morality out there, and you just sort of submit yourself to it. And there's a continuum there that people sort of peg themselves on in comfortable and uncomfortable places. The hubris, and frankly, just zoom out as the human animal in the last 500 years, not even that long, 200 years, the incredible pace of change that we are in as a civilization, as a species, is pretty bonkers. Like, it's pretty wild. And you would have to say the animal and the mindset that's okay crafting our environment in the way that we want it is really winning. And then frankly, it's not going to lose. So the conservative mindset is not going to suddenly not everyone's not going to just become Amish tomorrow. That's not going to happen. But I mean, maybe some people would want that, but laughing at it, maybe I just did making a joke of people who are interested in sort of, maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit on this because, hey, Icarus flew, too close to the sun and Eve ate the apple. Every religious story warns you not to play God if you're the human. Every single one, right? It's like the tree of knowledge. Maybe not. Don't do it. That's for God to do. And we can dismiss it. We can laugh it off. This is, to bring in a whole other random reference, this is the conversation that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson failed to have. And I'll just say, when they were having their little philosophy debate, they missed it by a mile. And I don't want to name names, but it's not an accident that I'm seeing a large correlation in my friend group of the people who were Jordan Peterson fans who are now firmly in the Trump camp and arguing for conspiracy theory stuff. It's not an accident to me that's the philosophical grounding under it of that comfort and discomfort. But to Mookie's point, it's the same one. This overconfidence we have that we're not too close to the sun and we won't fuck it up really is not just arrogant and offensive, but sometimes just flat out wrong. Sometimes we do fuck it up, and we ought to admit that as humans. And finding that balance, I don't know if we all identify ourselves as atheists. Obviously, Ali, you wrote that book, but
I'm the atheist Muslim. You guys are the atheist Jews.
There you go. But
the conversation could not happen anywhere else.
Yeah. The conversation by the new atheist energy fizzled out in this way that I was kind of bummed about, because this was supposed to be the heart of what it really means. Being an atheist is easy to reject and say oh, there is no God, so it's up to us. That was Nietzsche's challenge, right? To bring in deep philosophy. Nietzsche's challenge of God is dead that everyone quotes. They forget to read the rest of it, which is this beautiful passage about what sacred games shall we come up with? And is it too much for us? I'm getting it wrong, but it's a beautiful passage. You should find it. It was a direct challenge, and he issued that challenge long ago. And we still kind of are afraid of it in some ways and haven't really grabbed onto it. Or we think, oh, that's an easy one and we got this. We'll just do it. And it's just not true. So I have a ton of sympathy. It demands an actual conversation, like you're saying, Mookie. All of these things are deep level. And you may be if you're someone watching this who has Trump fans who do not speak at this level, you may be thinking you can't have this conversation with them. That's fine. I literally was talking about how the WWE is this conversation. Donald Trump as a character in worldwide wrestling, it's all the same shit. You can put whatever veneer you want over it. It doesn't need to be a philosophy seminar. You don't need big words. You can have this conversation on a basic level. I want to bring in one more thing with that point, Ali, and then I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about Borat before, and the Borat movies are so good. The new one, frankly, I don't think was very funny. Just unfortunately, was sort of a miss. But
I loved it.
I know you loved it, and I want to talk about the earlier Borat movie, the one, the first one.
When Azamat Bagatov was not a chair.
Yes.
Yeah, that one.
What I love about a lot of the scenes in that movie is people think Sacha Baron Cohen pulls these pranks and kind of pulls one over on people and makes them look like fools, and you sort of laugh at them. There's that long section for people who've seen the movie where he's hanging out with those two, like, very deep redneck, I think Alabama people, like, like guns and say a lot of dumb shit, frankly. And you want to like roll your eyes, and it's very like, out there, Trump's kind of stuff. But the truth is, like, they passed the Borat test. Like, you might be laughing at them because of that arrogance and ignorance, but the whole entire weird, wacky, zany scene of him trying to like make his way to California and marry Pam Anderson in that story, they like were going out of their way to help the guy, and they were genuinely like nice people, again, confused, uneducated, but good-hearted people. And even when he was at the etiquette scene, like, he was the worst of all fucking time, but they were trying so hard. And again, the joke is right. The joke is that they're so ignorant that they would even think that someone from Kazakhstan would act this way. So there's a bit of sort of like ignorance of the world racism that you could sort of laugh at on some level. But you know what? Those people are passing the test, and they're like the nicest people in the world. He brings a bag of shit to the table at the side, and still they're trying to be like, excuse me, let me explain this to you in like the nicest way. And you're like, these people are beautiful, even though they're, ignorant on a surface level. And because of polling in a lot of ways, and because of Trump and the rhetoric of it, we stay at this surface level arguing up here all the time, when pretty much everyone passes the Borat test, which is why I think they're beautiful and amazing, really funny movies. Is like, you know what? There's a lot that binds us together and keeps us together. And those deep philosophical differences of sort of like, I don't know, should we re-engineer the environment to suit our, one day we're going to be able to like re-engineer the environment with ease because of technology. And part of the world is going to resist it of like, we shouldn't play God. And those are like genuine questions, because we might fuck it up. We might fuck up all kinds of things. People might blame globalization, being like, look, now we have coronavirus, right? There's costs to these things, and we have to have honest conversations at all levels. But we shouldn't forget that our humanity we all pass the Borat test. Most people pass the Borat test of all political stripes. And we have to be able to talk to our neighbors again at some point on just that level. Just like have a fucking coffee with your neighbor and be nice. And then, and if you're a liberal, don't start wagging your finger, like Mookie said. If they they won't put it this way, but what they're telling you is some hesitation that, maybe, and when they say the word God, they might, you can translate it in your mind to just philosophical natural law, or something like, we should just trust math and science to figure this out on its own, and we're not going to like go grab the reins to this kind of thing. Try to translate it as a liberal on your own and have those conversations. If you're looking for a policy thing, prison reform's a great place to start, and I totally start.
I wanted the Sacha Baron Cohen actually said this in one of his interviews about Borat 2. Is that those two guys that he lived in the house with?
Yeah,
he said they were the great, because they asked him, they're like, what did you learn? He's like, I just learned that, they were there, and it's funny, they're ignorant, but they really helped me. They were really nice to me. They were very gracious hosts,
nicest guys in the world,
and so they were really great guys. And that's something that I actually have picked up on it too, like with the Borat movies. One of the things that I've seen with this whole Trump issue, and I think I agree with you, the self-righteousness and the moralizing, right? The moralizing is the biggest issue. And we like to joke around. I mean, that's a different thing. But there's I think one of the problems with the moralizing and the self-righteousness that happened in the past, like, did you guys see the Oliver Stone film W? On George W. Bush? Yeah. So everybody, especially in my ethnic community, or whatever you want to call it, like, the Muslims and the Arabs and the Indians and South Asians, they hated George W. Bush because of his wars and everything. I always thought that what he did was terrible, and, the war crimes, everything. But I just never thought he was a bad guy.
Yeah.
Like, I always thought that this is what he thought. This is what his daddy's friends, your dad's friends, like Dick Cheney, they were all in his cabinet, and they were part of his administration. And then he stopped talking to Dick Cheney afterwards. He didn't pardon his friend, right? The Scooter Libby thing. Because at the end of it, he really was conscious about his legacy. The stuff that he did for HIV in Africa, right? That's recognized by everybody as, one of the most dramatic improvements in the situation there. So when it comes to him, Mitt Romney is not a bad guy. He's not a bad person. There's an ideological difference, but it is not a moral difference. Like they're doing what they think is right. They just disagree with you. And when people demonize them and made people like Mitt Romney and George W. Bush and his dad and everything the devil, then when Trump came along and it really was a difference between good and bad, like Trump is a bad person. Like the lying, the manipulation, and everything, like he is a bad. When the real thing comes up, then we're confused. Then we're like, so now what do we do? Like we called all of these guys really bad, but this guy's like really, it's the cry wolf situation, right? And that I think is one of the worst things about this, the hyper moralizing and self-righteousness part of the liberals is that when a real situation like that comes up, then you don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. Well, you don't have any credibility.
And it's also a bad reflection on the electorate and our fellow Americans, our neighbors. If you have a condescending, self-righteous attitude and the way, then people naturally are allergic to that sensibility. The sky is blue and all of a sudden it's red because they don't like you because you're an arrogant prick. So I think if we just change that attitude, it could be helpful. And there are policy implications to Jay's point too. I mean, consider COVID lockdowns right now. We discussed 235,000 dead Americans, but the lockdowns were deeply resented when Trump went on that Twitter tirade, liberate Michigan, liberate Wisconsin. Remember, it seemed epidemiologically absurd and anti-scientific. But there's a lot of research that points to lockdowns being not as effective as we once thought. And there might be more equitable ways to mitigate the disease, including mask wearing and physical distancing, that doesn't entail complete shutdowns. I'm not saying that's true. But what I'm illustrating, to reiterate your points, is that there are not only emotional repercussions to humbleness and listening, but there's even policy-driven ones that will directly impact our future moving into 2021 and beyond, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's international relations, whether it's trade, whether it's immigration. There's an immigration problem. There's a trade problem. There's a globalization problem. There's a China problem. With Trump leaving, these problems are not going away. And if Biden and Harris are going to succeed, it's a matter of being inclusive and listening, but moving forward in a way where we might even, and I will even say this, we might even learn a thing or two from Donald J. Trump when it comes to foreign policy. And compare it even to Obama's blue line in Syria. And our status internationally, and the prices that a red line, right? And the prices that we've paid for interventionism throughout the course of post-World War II history. So it's not Trump bad. It's not Trump the H word. It's who we are as a people, to better understand ourselves, for why so many of us embrace the personality like Trump as a reaction to the reaction.
So we
can do better. We can do better.
We can do better. But where the non-starters are for Trump, because to Ali's point, Trump is a different threat. It wasn't an ideological threat. He is a jerk. He's a bad guy. He's a jerk. But what just can't be allowed is we have to live in certain kinds of structural norms that are very base level. Someone like Amy Coney Barrett, we brought up before, like I disagree with her ideologically. Everything I just said about the sort of natural law playing God stuff, like she and I couldn't be further apart on that spectrum.
Bad person though.
It's not about being a bad person, Ali. It's a different point about with Donald Trump. Yes, he's a bad person. It doesn't matter. JFK was was a philanthropist.
Guys, we survived him though. We survived him.
But wait, we're making too much of the bad guy stuff. Ali, you're too worried about his personality. Like you said, it doesn't matter. Mookie says it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters either. What's not allowed is the bad guy part of him was so corrosive and still is. This is a really dangerous couple months at the really baseline norms that we need to keep everything we just talked about together. Have to be things like the courts have to hold at some level, or peaceful transitions of power. These very, very
they haven't collapsed yet. But
they haven't collapsed. The courts won't. Yeah, the courts won't collapse, but he's attacking them in a way.
He's attacking them, but
yes.
the institutions of government and the three branches have remained intact. They've wobbled.
So I wish he was able. I wish he was able to be the guy that we're all saying he is, or the policy, or we might learn from him with leaving those things alone. He's never been able to because they're about to. The walls are collapsing on him, and we know that like the sin of Donald Trump. And I think even his supporters would admit it, is that his ego is so big that he will burn down the house.
So what?
And with everything with it. No, but that's not a so what. They're going like that's the thing that we cannot let the house burn down.
But okay, so we change our laws. But so Jay, we change our law. We change the executive branch. We change from etiquette to law. So what has been illegal? What has been illegal so far?
No, it's not about illegal. It's not even illegal. Like I said, I want him to bring it to the court so we can show these lines to people. I want the American people to see he hasn't burned down the house. I want him to see that the structure is still there.
Everything is still.
But he wants to tell you he's burned it down. So that's why I'm like, bring it to the court. Bring the court case tomorrow, so we can show you. The point I'm
making though is there's resiliency to the American system. And when you bring in a Molotov cocktail like this and you throw it in there, there's a buckling. But we've survived it, and if he would have gone for another 4 years, it would have been even more, right? But there are benefits to this too, guys, which is there's an action and there's a reaction, and we learn about ourselves and we learn about the government. I had no idea that the head of the executive branch had as much power as Donald Trump took upon himself, because this shit isn't written into law. It's just kind of, you're president, so we tacitly assume that you're a decent human being and you're going to play fair and you're going to obey this etiquette. He didn't. I didn't know that. I just want to be clear that I'm still talking to Trump voters and Trump supporters of like, I know everybody is having a hard time making friends with people who are acting crazy. When the time comes, you give them the space to disagree with you, but you cannot you cannot allow the things that really matter of like ignoring the court. If they start talking about deep state and like the Supreme Court doesn't matter, like those are the lines actually that we just have to keep a nation together. We have to keep the founding together. If in its best, everyone knows I'm a big David Deutsch fan who follows me. His entire thing, which he got from Karl Popper, is that you just need a system of error detection and correction to remain in place. You need a culture of criticism to do that. Absolutely.
The American experiment.
Historical precedents are very important for that. I just want to say
absolutely.
I'm in violent agreement, guys. But what are we going to do? Put this in the law? Are we going to have mandates as to how people are going to behave?
Mookie, it's already in the law. I'm saying, like, let's show the law. And none of us are just. I've been saying
American education sucks, which is the root of most of this.
I've been saying this for since the wokeism conversation got going. All of my friends, I'm like, just watch the courts; they'll hold. Things like there's a case in Idaho about transgenderism. I don't want to open that can of worms at the end of our conversation. That I'm pretty sure I know how the Supreme Court's going to write it in the end. We could talk about Roe v. Wade and stuff. I have a lot of faith in our courts. I've got a lot of trust in them holding the line. They will hold. I want the American people to see, to your point, Mookie, that he threw the Molotov cocktail. Trump, for as much of a bull in a china shop as he is, did not bring down the pillars at the corners. He didn't. But we need to see it. We need to see it, and we need to see it in the next 2 months. We need to see it, and that's why the thing. My wild prediction
in the next 2 months. See what? I don't understand.
My wild prediction on our last one would be great to see, which was that Amy Coney Barrett would be the one who says, fuck you, we still have a country, even though he just appointed her in this very contentious kind of thing. I want him to bring every single case and all of them be as public as possible, and Republican judges, which they already are doing, conservative judges, knock all of them down. If what we have, like I said, maybe you think they're the same problem. If what we can get out of this in 3 months and maybe a year from now is a QAnon problem that is on AON, that is dangerous still to deal with. I've lost friends to conspiracy theories. Like literally, we could talk about it.
Oh my God, yeah.
Rather than a Fox News 70 million Americans enraged in a mob on the street problem, that would be a better problem. We're just trying to figure out what's the best problem we can get out of this with Trump. And I think that would be the best version of the problem. Show him that if they think it's the deep state because the House still stands, great. Walk out, take your AON. I don't think it's 70 million people. That's my thing.
Okay, so let's say this. I think, I wanted to wrap this up, but I have to say one thing, and I want to ask you guys: do you have around 5 minutes to just a couple of comments here to address them? 5 more minutes. Are you good with that, Spitz?
Give me
yeah, let's rock. I mean, I can go all night, guys. You know, I've got a little key with a screw in back, and you wind it up between my cheeks, and I just keep going like one of those monkeys with the cymbals. You know what I mean?
I want to bring this up, and I can't believe this is. I'm going to sound like a total leftist right now, which I kind of am.
You have,
but you've been a raging leftist.
Yeah, I have been. I've gotten a lot in the last 4 years. I'm telling you, I used to get death threats from Islamist jihadists. Right? I've gotten so much from white supremacists and from not even white supremacists. I don't even know if they're white supremacists, but Trump supporters. Okay, just talking about, well, you're not really this, you're not. I told you guys about my niece who lives in Texas and who came to Canada. She went and she came here because even though she's born and raised in Texas, like hasn't really lived anywhere else. There were people telling her that, you know, well, racism is up for debate. Literally, that it is. Like these are people in school. They're telling her, well, you're not as American as everybody else, right? Because your parents are from Pakistan. Things like that. So I think what Van Jones, I don't know if you guys saw that clip.
Yeah, crying Van.
But
he was Van Whalen.
Yeah, no, he was Van. Okay, that's good. But I think that resonated with a lot of people that I know because being on the receiving end of this, I know that we want to be compassionate and we want to understand the Trump. So I don't think a lot of I'm going to sound like AOC here, but I really don't think a lot of my white friends, they have been exposed to it in that kind of receiving end, personal kind of way that's happened in the last 4 years. So when we talk about compassion, there are people when you understand them from the whole Borat point of view, that okay, they are good people, they want the best. I understand that's the reason why I give like old people. Like people over 80 who say racist shit or homophobic stuff, I give them a pass. I'm like, that's the time that they lived in. But at some point, I do think when I see all of this stuff that, okay, they may be into it because of economic reasons or they're anti-globalization, whatever. But this thing is not a deal breaker for them. Like they're okay with it. There's some sort of tacit approval where, okay, yeah, he is racist. We don't like the stuff he says. He said all this stuff about, you know, banning Muslims and, you know, all these things about people going back to their shithole countries. But you know what? The anti-globalization thing is more important to me. That stuff is sidelined. And when they say that stuff is sidelined, that becomes that's actually something I think we should push back against. I think that that's perfectly okay to judge that. Yeah. Right. And I don't think that's hyper-moralizing. That's not like judging Mitt Romney supporters. It's not like judging George W. Bush supporters. It's a completely different thing. So I just wanted to say that from my point of view and balance this out.
To respond to that,
like I know. So last thing, I do think it matters that he's a bad person.
Yes,
like if someone is a bad person, I do think that part of it matters.
I agree, and I wanted to, dovetail with it that because I've been making this point elsewhere, but maybe it's kind of your point, Mookie. I'm not sure. Like the role of the president's a weird thing in a modern society and in modern 2020 America, where, generally, and we're going to get back on track with Biden and whoever comes next onto sort of this neoliberal march. Honestly, Trump really was. I think when the history books write this hundreds of years from now, it will be seen as it'll be written in the same chapter, probably at the end of 9/11, which popped a bubble in sort of this like hubris march of globalism and being like, oh, look what came back. And a lot of people were like, fuck yeah. And it led to Donald Trump after a lot of pain. But I think we'll probably get back on track with sort of that march. We'll hopefully have learned some lessons. We certainly, as liberals and let's say globalists, got like, oh shit, like we got a really swift reminder of the power of the other side here, just like in WWE, right? Vince McMahon got the keys back to the show, but nobody forgot that who has the real power here? Well, it's the crowd and the mob. If they want to turn on you, it'll be theirs, and they'll bring in Donald Trump to shave your head again. So I think we all sort of got that lesson, hopefully, and it changes a little bit. But so generally, we're arguing about, you're talking about George W. Bush and Mitt Romney. We could talk about the Clintons and all that. Philosophically and policy-wise, we're talking about turning the knobs of the dial a little bit. We're talking about changing the tax rate a little bit. We're talking about how much engagement here or that or whatever, but it's pretty much the same philosophy, except for Donald Trump was an exception in that. But generally, so if that's the truth, if we're sort of having this, let's call it just like there's something different and deeper energizing the movement of the world, not just America, towards this global cooperative kind of society. If we get there, what do we want the role of the president to be? And I think we underestimate just how important the role of literally like a storyteller and figurehead that we want them to be, a custodian of the myth of the nation, to take that through, which is why I'm so like upset and pointing on like, hey, that myth is made out of our courts, etc. Someone like Barack Obama had a lot of policies that I think were failures. And he was a bit of a political novice, choosing the healthcare war to fight that I thought was sort of a waste of 2 years to get a bill out of it, all that kind of stuff. But he was a beautiful custodian of the story, absolutely like genius at it, right? And that's worth a lot on an emotional level. But I think the emotional level of a president is a huge role in today's world. And that's why, you know, a simple like vote for kindness, vote for empathy kind of message from Joe, I hope matters to a large, I think it really does matter to a large degree. And it really was upsetting to see them dismiss and not care that Donald Trump is just an asshole, a jerk. And so many of them would admit it to you and say like, yeah, I don't like how he really talks.
That's why they like him.
I mean, I think there is some of that. Sam Harris is probably right with that epiphany, but there's plenty of people that you could talk to who would say things like, oh, I wish he wouldn't tweet so much, but you know, I kind of like his policy.
But to your point, the implicit racism, it's okay.
But they didn't recognize it. I genuinely, I do think there is such a thing as white privilege, but I don't think it's something that should be used to demonize white people. I think it should be used to, it just basically means that there's some things they can't see. Most of them are good people, so they can't imagine. They're like, I'm not racist. I would never treat somebody like that. So why does this person that I like treat people like that? I don't believe it. It's like, you know, usually when guys, we had a conversation once where there were a couple of girls that were talking about how they get catcalled at least once or twice a week on the street in Toronto. And, you know, one of the guys in the room, he's like, I just don't believe it. I don't believe that happens that often. Right. And he was saying that because he's like, I can't imagine people doing it, me doing it, my friends doing it. He was generally coming from a good place, but he got demonized as a misogynist. I mean, understandably. Right. But because he was denying their experience, it's that kind of thing. So I do think white privilege exists. I just think it blinds people to the kind of experiences that I've actually directly online had people say this to me on literally like at least a weekly basis, several times a week. Right. So but it's just not it's probably a side of it that other people don't see.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting there though. And I agree with both of you. Overt racism needs to be tackled unequivocally and undeniably. And the president is a totemic figurehead and a storyteller, and the personality of the president permeates through the zeitgeist of a nation. That's undeniable. However, I have a libertarian third leg, if you will. So in New York, I sometimes hang out with Nick Gillespie. He's got great hair. We all know him. You know, I was always looking at his hair.
Always wears a leather jacket.
I enjoy his company, and where we are aligned, and again, it reverberates within me, which is we both believe, and I want to speak for him, but I believe in a self-correcting mechanism, especially for a country and an infrastructure like the United States of America. We have the three self-regulating branches in opposition and in coexistence with each other. We have a dynamic, diverse electorate. We've got geographical differences that would really make us probably 4, 5, 6 separate countries that are kind of congealed together. And I believe deeply that we have a self-correcting mechanism. And it's really the only kind of mechanism that we could rely on. And in this sense, through this lens, I really think Donald J. Trump was, in the big picture, to your point, Jay, 200 years from now, he'll be looked at as a kind of catharsis, a pivot point, if you will, of releasing some of that steam and being a harbinger for an eagerness, hopefully, for more unity, for more calm. We couldn't have had an Obama without Bush Jr., and we couldn't have had a Trump without Obama. That kind of oscillation in a two-party system is getting progressively more and more extreme. And that's detrimental in a lot of ways. And we're living in our era right now. We look at everything through the lens of 4 years of Trump, and we're in this critical transitional moment. So it's intense. We're afraid. We don't quite know what's next. But if we could leap out of ourselves a little bit and look at this through the context of history in a Hegelian kind of way, looking at the teleology of America, including civil rights, gender equality, all the good stuff in liberalism, kind of counterbalanced with this common sense of the right and this sense of kind of direction and purpose, maybe, however you want to qualify it. I think it's generally a good thing. I love being an American. I'm a first generation American. I feel we've come light years from where we've been, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's the process. It's not necessarily the destination. And Trump exemplifies so much of our core sensibility, whether we like it or not. That's why I thought he really could win. And I'm so thankful that he didn't. But for us to write him off as a blemish is a mistake. There's tons of stuff we can learn. He still have his 71 million minions. And there's a purpose behind all this, which is bringing the yin and yang of the United States of America together. We cobble it together. We got to jerry-rig it. But it's a great thing. America is awesome. And awesomeness expresses itself sometimes in really paradoxical, frustrating ways. As Carl Jung used to say, that the brightest of lights casts the longest of shadows. And I'll be the first to admit that Donald J. Trump was a shadowy turd on this great nation. But turds are fertile. You layer your garden with shit. And I think that the future is much better after all this. I really do. Honestly, I think it's a good thing. We should thank Donald J. Trump. Thanks, Don.
I won't thank Donald Trump because, like you said, the self-correcting mechanisms can ebb and flow. They could also break. They can break, and they're. We'll see. That's why I'm saying I think they're firm enough to withstand this in the last couple months, and we'll see what happens over the next few years. But we have to also understand. Nick and I argue a lot about libertarianism because I don't have as strong a sort of libertarian bone as you do.
That. I got a little sensibility there.
And he also, again, I already pointed out to Joe Jurgensen voters just how brain dead they actually are. Let's not pat ourselves on the back libertarians for Joe Jurgensen.
Yeah.
But
they might have helped Biden, though.
Joe, probably. I don't think they did. From my early numbers, I don't think they did. It's tiny. But to your point about self-correction, I just want to also point out that the libertarian ethic and ethos is the natural law, religious ethos, that you're diverted. The self-correction does not always self-correct.
I know. In principle, I'm not there, but I'm just saying in kind of logistical practice, there's tidbits that I like to take. I like taking little bits out.
Yeah, so do I. And so does all of America. It is a libertarian experiment, really. But that's always the danger of it, is that when you have to step into the free sort of enterprise system because it's becoming suicidal, is the freedom fetish in this country gets activated in incredibly alert ways. That's why I think post 9/11, this sort of, we don't need to worry about it thing just exploded. It's become a less libertarian place since 9/11 for obvious reasons of safety, and it continues there. But I think is why I'm bringing in 9/11, the challenges that we face in America and the whole world faces. I said this when COVID hit, and I was sort of joking, but also Camille Foster, if you know him, a mutual friend of all of ours, very libertarian, just like Nick. I was making sort of a joke, being jabbing libertarians a little, being like, "Hey, your philosophy don't look so good right now, does it?" And they sort of got mad at me because it's very ideological in the libertarian camp. And I was like, "Hey, wait a minute, I just want to talk about this." But clearly, and you're talking about masks and how do we do this or whatever. Clearly, they were hoping Sweden would work out as the perfect example.
Absolutely, herd immunity would solve all those problems.
They were like, you don't have to do anything. Libertarian's still good. And it's well, not really. And frankly, the pandemic was just one thing. We have a lot of things coming down the pipeline that we're dealing with that really are difficult for America as a very libertarian, cowboy, freedom-loving country that has been very good self-correcting, because we all know how libertarianism sort of works, that it is self-correcting. You feel the pain, then you change, or people sort of go this way and then they change. Well, there's a lot of problems that are coming out that feel suicidal without some.
I'm with you.
Parental regulation.
I'm on a macro trans-historical. Remember, I said Hegelian teleology. Just big picture. I'm not saying pandemic is the worst thing for a libertarian.
But the next on that scale, I don't know the next 100, 200 years on that scale if it becomes a world that suddenly becomes, I'm not saying China, but becomes a little more paternalistic. And I'm not saying I welcome that world, but just because we don't know how to sort of solve that world with the self-regulation in there. So the Trump
again, it's the balance. It's the equilibrium. You know what I mean? And Trump, we're not here, and then we go here. I'm just trying to get a little equitable here.
So I gotta wrap this up soon. So it's just I think that when you said 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I think that nails it. Like just generally, and I remember talking to Steven Pinker about this, about whether this is a movement or a backlash, and I think I've talked about this before. Where, and you see this with jihadism, like the rise of it's getting more and more fundamentalist.
I think that's right.
It's more of a backlash, but the problem is with backlashes, even if they're fleeting, they can be tremendously destructive.
Look at Venezuela.
I know they can be tremendously. There are genocides that have happened during backlashes.
Absolutely.
Right? So, but when we're in a sort of focusing illusion right now, we may not be able to tell. I remember when we used to talk about deplatforming versus free speech. Like you take these guys off Twitter, like Alex Jones, and everything. We had this. I remember Armin and I were talking about it, and I was like, we're just going to turn them into martyrs. They're going to become bigger than ever. They're going to have a huge amount of influence. Well, the thing is, they just kind of petered out. Tommy Robinson, all these guys, Milo, like they're gone when they were deplatformed. That's a separate conversation, whether that should be done or not. But we maybe we're thinking, oh, now Trumpism, like his loss is going to spark a new thing and it's going to go on forever and ever. It may not be. There's no way to tell right now. Yeah. So I'm going to just get a couple of questions or a couple of comments that I liked here. We'll just do like 2 or 3 at the most.
Cool.
I'll let you guys know. So Adam Mason is saying, do you think he's got a different take on this idea about Republicans, the congressional wins? So says, do you think there's any significance to the fact that Trump lost the election? But as you already mentioned, Republicans down ballot did fairly well. Many pundits have said this suggests there's some real contingent of conservative American voters who shied away from Trump. So they, voted against Trump, but voted for the. Yeah. But are they of any real significance against those swayed by demagoguery? I think that's a really good point. In addition to what we're saying about driving turnout for Republicans, like the turnout that he drove, or maybe he didn't drive it, they checked off their senator and their congressman boxes, but they voted for Biden.
Yeah.
How many of those are there, though? I've heard that too, and I'm just kind of like, it's really small, folks.
Probably.
I recognize that, but remember, I mean, Trump lost, so in aggregate, the overall number of voters on that one ballot, they could have gone Trump senator, Trump senader, Trump senator, and there just weren't enough of them.
To that point, because clearly I'm like a data nerd and been staring over it. I'm like so allergic to people trying to tell really like firm narratives about the numbers so far, with like these tiny shifts. Even the exit polls, they were doing it for early voters, so it wasn't just day up, but it wasn't phone, and there's a lot of mail-in stuff, and they're trying to correct some of that. People coming up with like black people and LGBT voted for Trump. Like, calm down. These are like people who went from like 4% to like 7%, and you're like, it almost doubled. You're like, yeah, it's still nothing. It's 93 on the other side.
Just like, is it a trend or is it just an anomaly? Right?
Yeah, we should chill out with like these overarching narratives.
And,
by the way, the betting markets still have Trump with a 7% chance.
I saw that. What's up with that? Yeah.
Well, that's because again, there's the debate around the Electoral College. Right? You could do shenanigans there. You could do shenanigans at the 11th hour. We'll see. It should be interesting.
Yeah, that's I think
at the very least
really going to matter.
And Vladimir Putin is yet to
chime in.
Yeah, he's not in yet.
He hasn't called him. Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu did a fun little thing with.
He did both.
He did both.
He congratulated Trump for being such a great ally, and he tweeted congratulations to Biden. So He's playing both sides.
Oh, he has to.
As a Jew, hey.
Oh, God. All right. So, yeah, I'm not even going there. Yeah. Jim King is saying, should federal government prosecute Trump for crimes or SDNI or the State Department of New York?
Excellent question.
Or let him off at attempt for reconciliation, prevent him from being seen as a victim of the deep state and martyr.
Great question.
That's a great question.
Earlier,
and I want to ask, do you think that Biden, in an attempt to bring everything together, will pardon Trump? Because another thing is
that would be a great idea.
Yeah, but so here's a problem. I think I'm torn about this because if first of all, if he's going to do anything, he'll do something. The indictments are going to come after the 20th. I think he's got to be indicted to have. You have to have something to be pardoned for. That stuff will happen after the inauguration. And if he doesn't, well, I guess, if he pardons him, that's going to be a huge issue. But if he doesn't pardon him, then you're no different from all those other countries where the moment you lose an election, you get thrown in jail by the guy who won.
And remember, the 71 million.
It doesn't need to be federal. The question was SDNY. I think federal should not do the prosecution. I don't even know exactly what the crimes would be, but the SDNY has been licking their chops to go get back on their cases. It's been 4 years of judges telling them, well, we're not sure if the president can really be prosecuted.
But if the federal pardons him,
you could pardon him. Yeah, you could. I don't think you should pardon him.
It's not going to apply locally. It's not going to apply on the state level.
So the SDNY,
even a presidential pardon won't get him off the hook.
Yeah. So the SDNY will still go.
It's still be in.
Well, in that case, it may not be such a bad idea. I don't know.
No, folks. I think it's a bad idea. I think Trump's got to walk. Trump can't be in an orange jump.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's a bad idea to pardon him. But Jay, why do you think he shouldn't be?
It's a fine line. Mookie, I get it. I just don't want to live in a world where he pulled it off. Where he pulled off the lesson to America that you could get away with it if you just wait it out and bitch and moan long enough. Like, I just hate that that's the lesson. Part of the backbone is also supposed to be that no one's above the law. I think it's awesome that a president is a private citizen the moment, that they step off. So, I would, if there's a way to do it without, obviously you just put on your consequentialist hat and you're like, hey, if it starts a civil war, it's probably a bad idea. But I just hate that. That's been his game, is to surround himself with a mob of angry people. So he's too big to fail. He's too dangerous to touch.
But you can do with everybody, right? Nixon's pardon Ford, right?
But his mob wasn't ready to. It's
a tough shit sandwich that we got to eat. Which is letting Trump off. I feel strongly about this, folks. And this goes full circle to how we opened this conversation, which is why I love this question right now, which is, if we're talking about a path forward and we're talking about reconciliation, it doesn't have shit to do with Trump. It has to do with 71 million people, and it has to do with moving the country forward in terms of inclusivity, listening, calm. And again, it's a tough shit sandwich. I would love to see the orange maniac in an orange jumpsuit. It would be the coup de grace for this entire mess, but I got to eat it because we got to just move forward with a clean slate. We can't have this guy in a cell with people outside going apeshit. It just can't happen.
Okay. All right. How many more do you got? I got to wrap it up.
I have a hard stop in 3 minutes, so we'll just do one
Mookie's
more.
shit analogies are getting really good, though. So.
Okay, so I've got to go in 3 minutes. So just the last one, and then I actually have to literally take off. So Shauna Heron is asking, because the base essentially lives in an alternate universe, right? How do you find your way to truth watching Fox and Ben Shapiro? So this has been a big problem, right? It's like, whether it's cable news channels, podcasts, or social media people in their bubbles, the rabbit hole article they had in the New York Times, the people that we have, the mutual friends we've lost, Jay, to conspiracy theories, as you're talking about.
Yes.
What do you do? How do you find your way to truth? I mean,
it's a really good question.
I don't think we have an.
I would recommend that we stop saying that we are the arbiters of truth. That's a start. Mm-hmm. Because the way this question is posited is that Ben Shapiro and Fox News are totally fucked up. They're on Mars. They're smoking crack. And it's like they're a cult. And I'm going to go back to what I was harping at earlier, which is we have our own implicit biases, and then we look at them like crazy motherfuckers the same way they look at us.
It's too relativistic.
I just think that we got to get off our high horse. We should not ask questions like that. Like they're an alternate.
I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard.
Part of the problem.
There are objective differences between like the New York Times and Alex.
80-20. There's a lot that the New York Times.
I don't know. I think
I'll say the long game with it. I mean, it's a really well worded question, but the long game is about not necessarily the way you put it, Mookie, like arbiters of truth. It has to. We've done a very bad job teaching science in this country,
right? Bingo.
In the world.
Yeah, that's it.
But science, not as here's a bunch of books on the shelf and here's the answers and the formulas that you memorize. Science as in a way of thinking, a way of an epistemology, a way of contacting the truth. How do you know that? The left is terrible at saying how they know things. They just think they know things. And there's obviously an argument for how we know things. And when it's, to your point, when it's a moral question, the argument of how do you know that's the moral thing to do, especially if you're not invoking God, is famously a philosophically perplexing question, and get some humility with it.
Yeah. All right, guys. I gotta sign off. I gotta go. This is great. Mookie, I have to give you a phone call tomorrow. So whenever you're free, we'll talk.
Are you mad at me? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not mad at you. This is about the other thing that we were going to talk about. How can we don't get mad here. That's why you guys are here. Nobody gets angry.
Yeah, I had a client contact me earlier. He's like, we need a one-on-one. And I was like, oh, that's not good.
We need to talk.
That's not good.
This was, I think this was, this was really good. I have a lot to think about. We're going to keep on talking.
Yeah, man.
All right, let's recalibrate, because it's going to be a rough ride until January 20th. And there could be violence January 20th, folks, when that official, that's fucked up.
Let's see. But I do hope it goes to court. Okay, guys. Right. I got to sign off. I got to leave. So I'll talk to you guys soon.
Rock-a-rolla.
All right,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks so much, Ali, for hosting. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.